Doorway is a linear keyer, which is another way of saying that it is a soft keyer. As opposed to other keyers, which operate based on comparators, Doorway is capable of pulling softer keys without harsh edges. One of the easiest ways to see what Doorway does is to use a ramp. So I'll plug an H plus V ramp into the source input of the Doorway. I'll take the key output and we'll put that into layer 1 of a color quartz. As you sweep through the threshold, the Doorway isolates the brightest parts of the image. If I switch this to outline mode, you're just seeing the outline of the area that is being keyed. As I bring the gain down, you get a softer outline. And as you bring it up, you get a harder and harder outline until you're basically just seeing the tiniest little sliver of the area that is being keyed. If you switch it to solid, the gain control will adjust the softness of the entire key. The keyer also has controls for foreground and background. So the background right now is set to black, and the foreground is set to full white. If I invert these, we get an inverted key. I also have inputs which allow me to put different signals in. For example, I can go foreground input, take some noise from one of the ants, adjust the gain here, this is summing, and then we start to get that noise just in the foreground parts of the image. And while Doorway can certainly be used to make simple shapes like this circle, it's far more useful in creating complex shapes. So in this example, I'm going to sum together a prismatic ray and a ramp that goes through a staircase to create a more complex shape. First thing I'm going to do is take my H plus V ramp and put it into layer 2 of color quartz. I'm just doing this so I have a nice colored background instead of just the black. I'm going to take the triangle output from the prismatic ray and put that into the channel 1 input on a passage. The through input on the passage is going to get a ramp that goes into a staircase. And here I'm just using staircase so that I can take that ramp and multiply it to get a little bit more of an interesting result. So let's take a look at what we have so far. So I'm going to switch this over to vertical ramp because that's more of what I want. There we go. So now I have the vertical ramp going out into staircase, and all that the staircase is doing in this case is taking that ramp, which would just be one horizontal bar, and multiplying it into more horizontal bars. The prismatic ray is synced. It's giving me these vertical bars. So now I'm getting a combined shape. And you can see here, it's got darker areas and brighter areas. What we're going to do now is take that into the Doorway, and this is going to give us a more defined shape. So now as I adjust the threshold, you can see we're getting a more concrete geometric type shape. I'm going to turn the gain all the way up just as we start experimenting. One of the neat things about this is that the different waveforms of the prismatic ray really start to show. So in this case we have the triangle output, and you can see those very clear triangle shapes. And as I switch to the different waves, let me pull these down, you can see very distinctive shapes. So the Doorway is great for creating these more graphic type of images, shapes, and patterns. And of course, as we change how we're mixing these two together, we get a lot of different options. And as I adjust the threshold, I get a lot of different patterns. If I switch this to outline mode and bring some softness in, now we just get outline shapes. And as you experiment with all the different controls, you can get quite a lot going on. Of course, we can also start to add modulation. So I'm going to take an LFO and put that into the threshold input. And I'll adjust these until it starts to do something that we like. I'm going to go back to solid. And adjust these. And speed up the pendulum a little bit. And then again, we can use the foreground or background inputs. In this case, I'm going to go the foreground input, get a texture for more of the ants. And I'm going to want to bring this offset down so we can start to see that texture. When this control's up too high when there's an input, you're basically just clipping everything to white. So you want to make sure you bring that down. So now we have a texture in our foreground. So Doorway is a pretty essential tool for getting more complicated shapes and patterns. Next, we'll look at how to use Doorway as a substitute for a simple VCO. To begin, I'll take the horizontal ramp from the visual cortex, plug it into the source for the doorway. I'll then take the key output from the doorway, plug it into layer 1 of the color chords. So what you can see, as we sweep through the threshold, we get a single vertical bar from the doorway. I'm currently in outline mode. If we switch to solid mode, you can see we get a wipe that fills the screen. That's not exactly what we want, so we're going to keep that on outline for now. As we adjust the softness, we get a thinner or thicker bar. Adjusting the foreground and background, we can invert that bar. We'll leave it like this for now. To make this more interesting, I can take another ramp and plug it into the threshold control. This will give me more of a curved shape. And of course, by switching through different ramps, I can get different patterns and shapes. If I want to introduce some movement to this, I can use a channel of the passage. So I'll take the ramp and go into the through input. I'll take an LFO from the pendulum, go into the input 1, and then I'll take that output back in the threshold VC. I'm going to speed up the pendulum. I like to do this so I can see the full range and adjust more quickly. So as you can see, by making these adjustments, I can ensure that this covers the entire range of the frame. And then I can slow it back down to something that I like. I'm going to soften this up. So now that we have this sweeping shape, we can use it in the same way that we would use any other voltage-controlled oscillator. In this case, I'm going to use it to frequency modulate a prismatic ray. So I'll go into the frequency VC input. I'm going to take this triangle output, and now I'll put that into layer 1. And I'll make the pendulum a little bit faster. So as you can see, now we're getting a nice frequency modulation effect. One way to make this a little bit more interesting is to use the same key output from the doorway to also modulate the pedestal voltage control on the prismatic ray. So I'm just using a stack cable here to split that signal. There we go. I'm going to increase the gain of the doorway just a little bit. So this is a nice trick by using the same signal for the frequency voltage control and the pedestal voltage control, making sure that the pedestal VC in is full max and the pedestal control itself is at 0. This allows us to only view the portion of the prismatic ray signal that is being modulated by the frequency voltage control. This is a cool general trick you can use in a lot of different patches. So finally, I'm going to just take the second output of passage, which is just our H plus V ramp being modulated by an LFO. Remember, these connections are normaled, so we're basically getting a similar output, but we can adjust fine controls. I'm going to just put this in as a background, just so we have a little color. So we aren't just over black here. And that's basically it. So there you have a very simple way to approximate the effect of a voltage-controlled oscillator using the doorway. And if you switch to the different ramp shapes, you can get very different results. So that's a fairly simple patch to show you how to use Doorway as a voltage-controlled oscillator. Next, we'll look at how to use Doorway to process external images and create wipes. Processing external video inputs is a very obvious use for the Doorway. Here I have some old footage from the World's Fair. There are two very simple ways to use Doorway to process external images: keying the image itself or using a wipe. I'm going to show you both of these individually, and then we'll look at a way to combine the two techniques into one. So the simplest way to use Doorway is to take the external input, put it into the source, take the key output, and then we'll take a look at that. So you can see now that we're in outline mode, we get a little bit of a solarization type effect as we sweep through the thresholds. And if we switch to solid, again, we'll get a more solid key, and we can adjust the gain to get different levels of softness. So this obviously can be used in a lot of different ways. And now let's look at how you can get a wipe effect. So I'm going to take the video footage and put it into the foreground input, and in the source, I'm going to put a ramp. I'm going to switch this back to solid mode and bring the gain down on that. And so now we're getting a very basic wipe effect. So I'm going to adjust the gain. And obviously I can automate this, and you can get a variety of different wipes. This is a very common technique with the visual cortex if you're familiar with that module. But what I want to show in this patch is how we can combine doing a wipe and keying the image itself. So to do this combination, I'm going to take my video output, and I'm going to plug that into one of the inputs on the crossfade section of a pendulum. I'm going to take my ramp, and I'm going to use that to voltage control that crossfade. Finally, we'll take the D output from the pendulum, and we'll put it into the source on a doorway. So now as I adjust my threshold, I'm going to go in outline mode. It's a little bit clearer. And bring this up. You can see we're getting a combination of the circle wipe and the keying of the image itself. And if we play with different variations down here on the crossfader, we can get an inverted circle wipe combined with that video key. Or we can do this. So here you see the video is being keyed out just within the bounds of that circle. To make this show up a little bit better, I'm going to take an image from the memory palace and put this into the background. So now you can really see how this is working. As we go through different threshold controls, we're sweeping through that circle while simultaneously keying the image. I can switch this to solid. And we get a slightly different effect. I can go down here and adjust my crossfade controls again. And we get a wide variety. So I'm going to switch this back to outline, get something pretty soft. And finally, I'm going to plug a texture into the foreground of the doorway. So in this case, I'm just going to use an unsynced prismatic ray with the frequency turned all the way up to get this kind of texture. And there you go. So by crossfading the signal before going into the source of the doorway, you can get a combination of an image key and a wipe with just one keyer. Thank you for watching, and please leave any questions or requests for future patches in the comments below.